Donald Trump returns to a Manhattan courtroom today for day 15 of his hush money trial. This caps off a week that saw testimony from Stormy Daniels. Former Trump attorney Michael Cohen is expected to testify on Monday. The 45th president strongly denies any wrongdoing. Pope Francis says without children, a country loses its desire for the future. Speaking at a conference on pro-family policies, the Holy Father called for lawmakers to do more to encourage couples to have children. I'm Tracy Saber with EWTN News Nightly. Join us tonight.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line with today's host, Colin Donavan. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
Welcome to EWTN's Open Line Friday. Our very own Vice President of Theology, Colin Donavan, is in the house. If you've got a question for Colin, the number's 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd still love to hear from you. That number is 1-205-271-2985, and we'll even put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. And you can always send us an email. That email address is openline@EWTN.com. I'm Jack Williams, Michael McCall producing the program. Your call screener is Matt Gubensky, and Ace McKay handling our social media efforts. So if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can type a question into the chat window, and it may find its way to us by the end of the program. And our host is he is every Friday, Colin Donavan. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
I think we're going to break with tradition a little bit here before we get to the emails. Claire was kind enough to hold over from the last program. She is in Dayton, Ohio, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Claire, thanks so much for holding. You're on with Colin Donavan.
Thank you, gentlemen. My question has to do with, I guess, I don't know if it's scrupulosity or if it's being moral. There are certain organizations, consumer goods organizations, and grocery stores around the country who have made it known that if they have an employee who wants an abortion and they cannot obtain it within the state, that the company will pay for that employee's travel to have that done. So is it, if you know for a fact that a grocery store or a company is doing this, is it scrupulous to avoid supporting those companies? I mean, we all have to buy groceries and personal care and things like that.
Sure, and that's such a common question today because we all have those cases where, what's the position we should take here? I think we have to start with first of all, where is the sin involved with this? Obviously, the sin is on the part of the employer who pays for it and the employee who takes the benefits from it. And there are so many things going on in our lives, such as taxes. We are taxed and money is spent in ways that we can't conceivably approve of. Although supposedly, we the people are the ones controlling everything. And do we just retire from life in those situations? I think if a practice is something we're being directly asked to cooperate in, then obviously we have to say no. And this isn't particularly in the case of life. There's a principle of moral cooperation, material cooperation, and formal cooperation. Materially is some kind of almost passive, you would say, cooperation in something that somebody does without the intention to have that as your own objective. And formal would be to embrace that sinful objective itself. So to say, yeah, I think companies ought to pay for this, that's a formal intention to and a willingness to abort yourself. There's going to be some grave sin involved in doing that. When it deals with commerce, it's a little bit difficulty because we are well removed probably from the decisions that are involved in that, just as we are with the government. We're also removed. We may be removed from the possibility of another option. We are free to take other options, to go to different grocery stores and to make the point, to tell the customer service or the manager of the store, I will no longer shop here for these reasons. If you just stop going, that makes no sense at all. You should tell the store why you are leaving so that they're aware that this policy. Remember the hubbub over a particular beer product a couple years ago, and a lot of people complained about that, and it got the company's attention. I'm not sure that in the end they did much, to satisfy those who were discontent, but it's something it's worth doing. So what we're talking about here in buying goods, especially goods that we use routinely, there is not a computer or phone company, telephone making company, cell phone making company that is not involved in some practice which we would judge immoral or some would judge lack of care for the earth or some other, or use of questionable use of employees in overseas countries, for example. This one gets raised all the time about the practices in the clothing industry, in the technical industry, and so on. Our support direct to the sinful activities, if we know in fact that they are being done, we cannot give that formally or applaud it or approve of it. If it involves inconvenience to us of some kind, and we're not giving any kind of formal cooperation, then our cooperation is considered material and it's remote. So I think it gets down to what is possible for you in your circumstance. As you said, there are other grocery stores you can go to. Maybe they're better ones even, but maybe one is more convenient for you. Maybe this one that you're talking about is more convenient for you. You can make the judgment to complain to the company and to go elsewhere, to boycott, essentially, is what you're saying. You can make that. Probably you're not morally obliged to do that because your cooperation is materially remote from the act of giving and paying for the abortion. Yes, in the millions and millions of dollars that companies make, and some of them make billions per year, some small amount of that money is paying for immoral things, no doubt. Promotion of things, advancement of causes, and these kinds of things. But it's actually compared to our, just as it is with our taxes, compared to our participation in paying our taxes, it's numerically remote from us, and it is also morally remote in that we have no direct connection with the actual sinful behavior. That's the consideration for a moral theologian. The consideration for you is, do you want to boycott, and can do that without tremendous hardship?
Yeah, in our culture, especially here in America, in our culture today, if you want to work a boycott list, that can become a full-time job really fast.
It can. And are you satisfying some interior urge there, and or are you actually accomplishing anything? That's a question too.
But I think the most important point that you made is leaving for the sake of leaving does no good at all. If you don't tell them that you're leaving, not only why you're leaving, first of all, you have to tell them that you're leaving, and then tell them why. Otherwise, it serves no purpose at all.
Yeah, and I would tell others who have this same concern that you don't have to do this, but this is what I did. That example can be positive for other people to make complaints and do that as well. So.
God bless you, Claire. We appreciate you holding on to ask that question today. 833-288-EWTN. That's our toll-free number. It is a free telephone call anywhere in North America. 833-288-3986. Also, you can text your question once again. You can text the letters EWTN to 58177. Wait for our response, and then text us your first name and your question. Message and data rates may apply. Our friends in the upper Midwest need to hear from you next week. Real Presence Radio is going to air their spring live drive starting on Tuesday. So if you're listening in Minnesota, North or South Dakota, Wyoming, Wisconsin, or really if you're listening anywhere, please remember to support your EWTN Catholic radio station. 833-288-EWTN. Wide open phone lines for you. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd still love to hear from you. That number is 1-205-271-2985. And we will even put you straight to the front of the line if you give us a call at 1-205-271-2985. It's EWTN's Open Line Friday with our very own Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donavan.
This is Deacon Jeff Drzymski. The Catholic Cafe is a great destination for men to share experiences and strengthen their faith. Sunday morning, 10:30 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Journey deeper in your understanding of the Eucharistic mystery and the Eucharistic story of God's love for us. Download the free ebook, The 12 Stations of the Most Holy Eucharist, at EWTN.com/Catholicism.
Come in faith, leave in hope. Don't miss the National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, July 17th through the 21st. It's a major part of the National Eucharistic Revival launched by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops to answer the Holy Spirit's call to rekindle a living faith in the hearts of Catholics across the country. More than just a retreat or conference, it will be a life-changing encounter with Jesus, and you can be there. EWTN is your guide and companion for this lineup of dynamic speakers, powerful revival sessions, and more. Hear EWTN personalities at a special breakout session, then meet them at the Event Expo, where you can also share your story. Plus, there's fun for the kids, too. Register now at EWTN.com/Eucharist for an exclusive registration discount. The National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, July 17th through the 21st. Jesus Christ will be there. Will you?
Protecting the sanctity of life. This is EWTN Radio.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question, call 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send us an email to openline@EWTN.com.
You know, here at EWTN, we're committed to spreading the gospel from a Catholic perspective, touching millions via television, radio, publishing, and the internet. And right now, we're looking for qualified people to fill a number of exciting positions. Make a difference using your God-given talent. Simply log on to EWTN.com/employment today. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Please pick up the phone and give us a call on one of these open phone lines at 833-288-3986. Arnold writes in, I'm a convert, former Protestant. One of my old professors talked about the God of the Old Testament. He said the Jews were henotheists and not monotheists. What is the difference, and does the Catholic Church have a stance on it?
Well, they were certainly monotheists in principle. The trouble is that henotheism simply means the tribalistic practices of different peoples who have multiple gods and maybe one that they particular pick. I'm thinking of my only Irish ancestors. There were a number of Celtic gods, but different tribal groups could have a favorite. You might think of someone with a particular connection to the sea, and so the god of the sea, Manan, I think his name was, that could be a particular favorite for them. So that was quite common, I think, and you look at the Romans and the practice of the centurions and soldiers and others. Mars, the god of war, was a particular attraction to them. The household gods that different families had in their little shrines in their homes and so on. So this is what's being described there. Fairly common feature of the ancient world, fairly common feature of polytheistic belief. I think what distinguishes the Jews is that God revealed himself as a personal God and not these sort of anthropomorphized emotions and things. You look at most of the gods are simply human traits and things, or human traits that are turned into divine traits, with gods representing them. I suppose it makes you feel good to think that your lust or your pride or your warlikeness is justified by a particular god's existence. With the Jews, there was that tendency also. We know that they built shrines on hilltops. We know that they created fires even for the immolation of their children. And in fact, having been converted to God, to the one God, they fell back into those practices, and God chastised them constantly about this adulterous behavior, as he referred to it, treating them as his wife, as his spouse, to whom they should be faithful. And so this is the historical context, but the point is there are not multiple gods, and any tribalistic belief that the Israelites had or fell back into pales against the narrative that is revealed to Moses and down in through Christ, and that is of one God, supreme and triune, as revealed through our Lord, and that this is the true creative power of the universe. It's not deified human beings, but an all-supreme creator God who also redeems his people whom he loves and restores them to that grace in which he created them, and that is for a life in union with him in eternity.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Rose wants to know, Colin, I want to know about the reach of papal infallibility and the limits to which it binds. Am I duty-bound that it's prudent to dogmatize its truths? Do we have to believe the third and fourth Marian doctrines, or all of the truth can? Well, she's basically kind of knowing where are the limits? Yeah, where are the limits?
Yeah.
And this is
The
first limit would be, well, I'll leave that alone. Go ahead.
Okay. There are certain things that are revealed, and the church is given the authority to determine their meaning. And generally it has done that in particular circumstances of history to clarify a problem, such as the doctrines about Christ or the doctrines about Our Lady. And so when the church does that, yes, it does it with the intention to bind believers to those truths. So the Marian dogmas, the Christological dogmas, the Trinitarian dogmas, the dogmas created or defined at the Council of Trent in response to Protestantism, other things at earlier councils, such as at the Lateran Council in the 1200s, where it was said, for example, that in the beginning God created both material and spiritual and material creation. In other words, both the angels and the material creation in which we exist. So there are a number of things that are taught infallibly down through history. Now we know of certain ones in our day where, so for example, on the Marian dogmas, the Immaculate Conception has been made a dogma of the Church by Pope Pius IX in the 1800s. the Assumption of Our Lady made a dogma of the Church by the Pope Pius XII in 1950. And so those are obligatory of belief. And the reason for it is very simple. God revealed certain things, among which revealed this authority of the Church to teach and to define. We see that clearly in sacred scripture. The apostles are the ones that spoke for Christ. Peter was the one who spoke primarily on behalf of all the apostles, in other words, all the church. And so this authority of Christ is in the apostolic authority of the church. And so when the church says this is something that must be believed, then we have the obligation, because the very act of accepting that teaching is foreseen in the gift of the charism given to the church. So we may have trouble with that. And there's a beautiful document which I refer to quite a bit, I think, and that is Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was the prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith under John Paul II, he talked about the ecclesial vocation of the theologian. How should a theologian treat these matters if he has some doubt or difficulty with it? He's not saying right out front, and these would be the lesser things, not the dogmatic things, the things that have been made into dogma, but even the other things that emanate from ecclesiastical authority. There's an obligation to listen to them, especially if it's the Pope, to listen, to give respect to that, and to think, okay, how is this to be understood? Do I have a difficulty with this understanding? In the case of theologians, he talks about then a dialogue within the church and having to, bring your doubts forward and to get those addressed. But it's always done in this filial submission and charity, not that we are the authority, not that we, the Catholics, or we, the theologians, or ultimately even one bishop or another bishop, but rather that ultimately the church's charism of infallibility, which is exercised by a bishop in his diocese, that not individually, of course, but collectively by all bishops, or exercised as a magisterium in a diocese, but exercised as a supreme magisterium in the Pope. There will be many things that are said that we should listen to. But that doesn't mean you can't parse them and say, well, okay, this belongs to the deposit of the faith. It's clearly so. Every time somebody talks about the Trinity, obviously, they're saying something infallible. Or they talk about the Immaculate Conception, they're saying something that's infallible. They're not infallible. The doctrine is to be treated as true. And so in all the things which popes and bishops say, much of that will simply be repeating what the church has always held. Now, when new ground seems to be broken, these are the circumstances which I think Cardinal Ratzinger is speaking of. He was talking, I think, specifically in the 90s to two things, which was a problem with some groups of theologians, and that is the definition by John Paul II that the church is incapable of giving holy orders to women. And the other one had to do with the definitions regarding life in Evangelium Vitae, the life from the moment of conception. And of course, that covers abortion, that covers in vitro fertilization, that covers euthanasia. It covers many, many things. That all of these are against the fifth commandment, that all of these are a species of murder. So as theologians struggle to accept these definitions, or perhaps the way they were put or the explanations that was given, he was reminding them of this docility which they should have, this teachability. They're not the teachers. The magisterium, magister, the teacher, is the teacher. So we need to listen to our ecclesiastical teacher, the magisterium. And we need to contemplate that. We need to maybe see where our difficulties with respect to it are. Bring doubts forward to maybe somebody who could have an answer for you, a friend, a pastor, a theologian, whomever. Bring those forward, get those addressed. So the idea would be that your objective is to remain faithful, and that means to overcome the objections that you have. So your objective is remain faithful, be docile and submissive to the authority of Christ acting through the magisterium. And that means, how am I giving objections? What manner am I using? Am I doing it respectively? Am I honestly seeking answer, or I'm just seeking, the justification of my position? If it's a position, Aquinas has one thing to say about that. We lose faith if we oppose something because the church teaches it and we believe something else. There's that word belief. Because everything now that we believe, otherwise we do because it conforms to our opinion. So we never want to take the view that our opinion is ultimately going to be supreme and the church is wrong, because that's a very quick path to actually losing the faith, which is a gift of God and not our right. So it's an area in which to be very careful. But yes, there are gradations of what the church teaches, some of which are infallible, some of which are in many ways speculative, the explanations that might be given for a certain teaching and so on, or even quite speculative, never spoken of things before. Well, those are different degrees, and we should be attentive and respectful and open ourselves to learn something. And hopefully the magisterium occasionally learns things as well that way.
Straight ahead, we'll talk to Mary in Washington, Carol in Illinois, and we've still got plenty of time for your phone calls. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's Open Line Friday with Colin Donavan.
If you have the TuneIn app, you can listen to the EWTN radio live stream. Go to TuneIn and search EWTN.
How many times have you heard someone talk about how important it is to be progressive? Have you ever asked them what they mean by that? G.K. Chesterton says, progress is a useless word, for progress takes for granted an already defined direction, and it's exactly about the direction that we disagree. We can't have progress until we've stated what our goal is. Then we can determine whether or not we're moving closer to it or farther from it. The real question is not whether we are progressive, but what is our goal? My goal is to get to heaven and to help others get there too. What's yours?
Spend more time with the Apostle of Common Sense. Visit chesterton.org for more information and go to EWTNRC.com to discover more books and programs written and inspired by G.K. Chesterton.
May is the month of Mary. How are you planning to honor the Blessed Mother? Whether it's planting a Mary garden in your yard, placing flowers by her image in your home, or adorning a statue of her with a handmade crown, there are many ways to express devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. EWTN invites you to celebrate along with us as we honor our Blessed Mother throughout her month with masses, devotions, TV, and radio specials.
I'm Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. Join me for Beacon of Truth today at 4 p.m. Eastern.
On the next Beacon of Truth, wrapping up our discussion on forming your conscience and more from Psalm 119.
Now back to Open Line with Colin Donavan.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Grab one of these open phone lines, 833-288-EWTN. That's our toll-free number, 833-288-3986, with your questions for our Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donavan. Next up is Mary, a first-time caller in Seattle, Washington, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Mary, thanks so much for holding. You're on with Colin. Hi, Mary. Are you there?
Hello. I am.
Yep. Go right ahead with your question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for taking this call. I'm really glad to be able to ask you about this. A friend of mine had a progressive degenerative disease, and at a certain point decided that's it. She didn't want to go to the end extreme with it and die from it. So she cognitively decided she's going to starve herself, and she did, and died. And now her family is going to have a spreading her ashes ceremony, or I don't know if it's a ceremony, but so, I mean, I know some of her friends think that is perfectly reasonable. It was a good choice, made a lot of sense. And now that spreading her ashes is equally okay. But I'm wondering, what kind of a response ought I to make? I was sorry to her family that she died, but never really talked about the suicide aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, she could, from the church's point of view, I take it, obviously, I would think no priest would give her a Catholic funeral. She's not a Catholic, is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. So that this would be scandalous. It's, I think, perhaps psychologically understandable. And we cannot make any judgment regarding her state of mind, but I think it might be one of the few cases where you would, should not participate, both from the point of view of the manner in which she died and also from the point of view that, of course, if she were Catholic, the spreading of ashes in that way would be forbidden. So there's a lot of arguments there. On the other hand, if you go other than giving some false comfort to them that this was all just honky-dory, would you have hope of any hope of accomplishing anything? I think that's a question to ask too. When the church and generally when priests and others say, well, somebody's getting married outside the church or in circumstances which are not quite the standard of the church, you can't participate, but, if you want to keep the doors of conversation open with a family member, to do something secondary to actually participating in that. Obviously, you always have to be kind and charitable with people, too. This is not quite that situation. I don't know that you would be contributing anything to it by going other than to give. I might note, having been a former Seattleite myself for a decade, almost a decade, 8 years, that the culture there, certainly in the last few years, certainly was tending that way in the 70s and 80s, but in the last few years has been wholly accepting not only of the taking of life at the beginning, after conception, but the taking of life at the end. And I think there's no real way to resist that politically in a place like that, but I think not to lend your support to it in any way is justified.
God bless you, Mary, and a lot of people will have you in their prayers. 833-288-EWTN, that's our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Carol is in Chicago, Illinois, listening on the EWTN app. Carol, you are on with Colin Donavan.
Yes, hello. I want to ask about the Jehovah's Witnesses saying that Michael the Archangel is God and Jesus is like an angel. And when they die, they just be dead.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, Jesus makes clear who he is in the Gospels. Before Abraham came to be, I am, using the same words which God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, which suggests, as a philosopher would describe, that he is existence, I am. In other words, he is he who exists without any other cause. We all have causes. Nature has a cause. Scientists investigate it, whether you call it the Big Bang or something else. They're looking for the causes of things, and they're going to get back to the Big Bang and find that there's no cause of that other than it simply happened. But in this case, God is the uncaused cause. I am who am. And Jesus told the Pharisees, before Abraham came to be, I am, and they wanted to stone him. And Caiaphas wanted to put him to death because he claimed to be the Son of God. In other words, to be equal to God. Now, that's been the belief of Christians since day one. 1900 years after Christ, along comes the Watchtower Society. And they draw up first of all, they actually changed the wording of the Bible. Their King James Version is not the King James Version. It's their version of it. And they come up with a theology which never before seen in the history of Christianity, among which is the idea that Michael the Archangel and Christ are the same. And I've heard this argument before, and I've talked to Jehovah's Witnesses about this, but I pulled it up on their website just to confirm a couple things. They point to singular scriptures like Jude 9, where they say God's word refers to Michael the Archangel, which means the chief angel. In other words, he is the archangel. Then they jump on to 1 Thessalonians 4:16. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a commanding call with an archangel's voice. So there's another reference to Jesus being the archangel. And finally, in the book of Revelation, Michael and his angels battle with the dragon as his angels. Well, of course, that Michael is Christ. And they have a few others. In all cases, the word angel, is anybody who studies Greek or is a scripture scholar would tell you, is simply a word that means a messenger. Before it was a biblical word, a scriptural word, a theological word, it simply means messenger. And so Christ is a messenger. He is the principal messenger of the fathers. He is, as the author of Hebrews said, that he is first and foremost of God. That all things are summed up. Whatever the prophet said, whatever the angels have said, all of this is summed up in Christ. So they have a little over 100-year view of this. Christians in general, Catholic and Protestants and Orthodox, have a 2,000-year view. We'll celebrate the 2025th Jubilee here next year. Pope Francis has declared it a Jubilee year of the Incarnation. They're a little late to the game. That's about all I can say. And they're certainly not understanding Scripture the way Scripture was ever understood before the Watchtower Society came along.
God bless you, Carol. Thanks for the phone call today. Still time for your calls. Pick up the phone and give us a jingle at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. John would like to know why the Diocese of Rome is not an archdiocese.
To be an archdiocese, you have to be, with respect to other dioceses, of some kind of equivalency, and is chosen to be not the boss over the other dioceses. An archdiocese is not the boss of the diocese. So here we have the Archdiocese of Mobile, which is really just Mobile and Birmingham. The Archbishop of Mobile is the senior bishop in this particular ecclesiastical province. And so, he would have, say, a role of fraternal correction or something like this, a brotherly role. And so the bishops, with respect to each other, follow a brotherly practice, a collegial practice, not a practice of the exercise of authority one over the other. The Pope is different. It's the primatial see of the entire church. And the Pope exercises that authority by himself. It's over every Catholic in the church, every layman, every cleric, every bishop in the church. So there is no comparable name to give it. The Pope of any particular day, Pope Francis, Benedict, John Paul, you go back through the list, they are Pope the instant they are elected the Bishop of Rome. They are made the bishop of the see which Peter founded. And by virtue of this, they are the chief bishop in the world, the supreme pontiff. Pontiff meaning bridge builder, and that could be referring to any of the bishops in the church who are our bridge, our historical bridge to Christ down through the centuries. And so the pontiff is the supreme pontiff, the Pope is. So he doesn't need titles. Interestingly, Pope Francis recently readopted something which Pope Benedict dropped in his titles, which are listed in the Pontificio Annuario, the book that comes out every year with all the cardinals, all the dioceses, and all the Roman curial offices and office holders. And for the Pope one of his titles was Patriarch of the West. And Benedict took that out. I don't think everybody necessarily agreed with his decision on that. Pope Francis put it back in, Patriarch of the West, in order to point out to the historical practice in the early church. You had the Patriarch of Alexandria, of Constantinople, of Rome, of the different churches that existed in the Middle East. So pointing to the fact that the Bishop of Rome is the Patriarch of all the churches of the Latin Rite, in addition to all his other titles. He's the Bishop of Rome. He's the head of he's the Primate of Italy. He's essentially the Archbishop as well in practice of the dioceses surrounding Rome, the suburban sees of Rome as they're called. So he's a many titles, but Archbishop is never used with respect to him.
I want to invite you to check out Mother Angelica Answering the Call. Doug Keck and Father Joseph Mary Wolf mine decades of phone calls to Mother's live show. Her wit and wisdom in answering those questions is as entertaining today and as spiritually beneficial today as it was the day she took the phone calls. That's Mother Angelica Answering the Call, Sunday at 2 and 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on EWTN Radio. 833-288 EWTN is our toll-free number. Still time for your calls at 833-288-3986. Jackson wants to know, are there secular arguments for the existence of human dignity?
I believe there are. I guess if you were a dog, you might think you could have arguments for canine dignity or something like that. Just by nature, I think we recognize our distinctiveness. They recently found a baboon who could basically use a leaf for medicinal purposes. I thought that was fascinating. Something we normally associate with human behavior or the using of medicine, but it can be a learned behavior too, and we certainly learned it as well. But the different animals have different degrees of a natural intelligence. Human beings have a certain natural intelligence as well, but we also have capacities that go well beyond simply the totality of our neurons and our different sections of the brain and so on. A brain that's smaller than some of the other mammals, for example, but yet has been capable of tremendous feats, intellectual feats, tremendous physical feats, and the creation of civilization, music, art, religion, and so on. So there's a distinctiveness about man. So we certainly would give to the lower animals respect for their dignity. Even, I guess, those that we eat, we will give them care until we decide to slaughter them for eating. We tend to them, fastidiously, we hope, at least those of us who, eat the cow or the pig or whatever. And so, but our dignity is so much beyond that. And I think this is something that reason gets to very easily, comparing ourselves to other realities in the universe. I think, I forget who said this, that one distinctive feature of man is we're the only creature who could contemplate For example, the astronauts that went up to the moon or go up on the space station, they can look back on Earth and they can contemplate what they see. Or the astronomers who look through the telescopes can contemplate what they see. Or the biologists who look through the microscopes can contemplate and draw conclusions and truths and understand the reality of things in a way that no other creature can do. So I think even for the non-believer, there are strong arguments for the human dignity. I think it's not surprising, however, that Christians, such as the European Union, or before that it was, of course, the founders of the EU, they were actually the principal movers and shakers were very devout Catholic men back in the 40s and 50s who were trying to revitalize the European culture based upon Christianity. And they've gotten away from that there, and the last several popes have had to remind them of the Christian foundations of Europe. But that belief has been incorporated into UN documents on the dignity of man, on the rights of man, the freedom of man, the respect due to man, because reading them, any human being, regardless of their religion, can recognize these things that flow from our unique natures. And I think that's evidence of what I've been trying to say, that reason alone can get to this conclusion, and the fact that world bodies such as that, whether they're losing that or not, but at least in the 40s and 50s when these kinds of things were talked about internationally, they recognize that you could define the rights of man and the dignity of man, and I think they have, and we can only hope that the world doesn't abandon that in favor of its subjective views of man, which are coming to the fore.
Last chance for a phone call today on today's program. Pick up the phone and call us at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Randall asks, did Our Lady ever mention that we should pray for the souls in purgatory, or is it something that the church asks us to do? And is purgatory mentioned in the Bible?
Purgatory is mentioned in the Bible indirectly. The reference is found there. The belief of a place of expiation is very old in the church. The offering of prayers and masses for the deceased dates to the era of the persecutions. You would imagine that these customs and practices are based on apostolic tradition, which simply means it's not written down in the Bible, but it was passed down from the same people who ultimately wrote it down in the Bible. And John reminds us of this when he says at the end of his gospel, there were more things that Jesus said and did. Well, the apostles knew those things, and so when the church speaks of apostolic tradition, it's speaking of things which the church knew and believed and practiced. The Mass, the baptism of children, the ordination of the clergy, these things that are described in Acts without commentary. They just show us what they did. Well, Acts and the other books don't contain everything that Christians did, but the church contains everything that Christians did. And that apostolic tradition passed down to the second generation, the third, and the fourth has made it to the however many generations we would be, probably about 50 or 60 at this distance. And so those things are believed. And the church very early on offered what was called suffrage for the dead. These could be described as what Judas Maccabeus tried to do, as described in the second book of Maccabees. He felt that his soldiers had a superstitious practice, maybe not ill will, not disbelief in God per se, but by having an amulet or something that would help them when they go into Bible, and hoping that they had not committed mortal sin, we would put it in our modern language today. He sent a sacrifice to the temple for the expiation of their sins. And that's basically what purgatory is. The expiation after death for the sins not completely forgiven in life, but for which we have responsibility, but not enmity for God, because enmity for God leads to a different place. And that's an important distinction.
AJ would like to know, is it okay for extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion to retrieve the Eucharist from the tabernacle, or should only priests do that?
I mean, the deacon generally does it. I think within the liturgy, I'm not sure if there's a norm on this, but I believe it's generally supposed to be the priest. The priest could be incapacitated, however, an older priest. The deacons generally do it, I think, if the deacon is participating in the Mass. I can see by necessity that priests have this, done. They're preparing the altar for the distribution of communion. So I'm not sure of the exact law on this point. But to open the tabernacle, to genuflect, to retrieve the sacrament, that is not in itself any different than to distribute the sacrament in terms of any solemnity or other. The question would be, is there an exact law on this point? And on that, I'm not sure.
And Walt wants to know, why does the Catholic Church find something substantial in Plato's philosophy? Specifically, St. Augustine has referred to it.
Well, too bad Alice Hildebrand is not with us to talk about Plato, one of her favorite authors, and always had something to say on his works. Plato, if you remember the philosophy that he held, and which has been generally described as Platonism, in the early centuries of the Church, there was very little known of philosophical systems other than writings. Aristotle was not known. I think it's speculated that much of his works were destroyed when the Romans destroyed the library in Alexandria, burned it. And so a lot of his writings contained by the Greek government. The Ptolemies were Greeks, so they had that connection to Aristotle because Alexander the Great was a pupil of Aristotle. So that philosophy has spread into Egypt, and so there are Platonists, you might say, both among Jews and Greeks of those early centuries who are trying to give a reasoned viewpoint of the world. And with Plato, it was the idea of the divine ideas, that all of these ideas are planted in our head. And that was a very satisfying explanation for people who believed in a spiritual creator and spiritual. And it was an adequate explanation insofar as it satisfied the day. And then along comes Aristotle when he was rediscovered by the Arabs and came to Europe as well, those writings. And Albert the Great encountered them, and his pupil Thomas Aquinas encountered them. And they began to understand that this is not a real perspective of how human beings understand the world. And so we speak of Aristotelianism or Thomism as having a realist view, an understanding that we take in the knowledge and from it we extract what we see in the world through our senses, and from it we extract certain truths about the things that we see and we know in our mind. This is different than God having to plant all of the ideas in our mind. What is a tree? What is a microphone? What is a jack, for example? We can learn these things through our senses. So that has become the predominant Catholic view. But Plato wrote many things in his Republic and his other writings that are still valuable today in describing the world of his day and political questions and so on, that he's still a very popular source to go to on those things. But philosophically, in terms of what's called epistemology, how human beings know reality, this realist view of Aristotle and Thomas is certainly the most widely used one in the Catholic Church.
On behalf of our host, our very own Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donavan, our producer, Michael McCall, call screener Matt Gubensky, and our social media maven, Mr. Ace McKay, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks so much for another great week of EWTN's Open Line. Back at it on Monday with Father John Trigilio. Until we get together then, have a great weekend, and God bless.